Hi folks, I'm back, cutting through the matrix, and I think there's enough people out there who are wise enough now to understand the connology, the tricks of conning the public at large through repetition and straight faces from important people. That's all it really takes to convince the public that something must be true, even though their antennas and their radars are all up, because something in the back of their mind says this seems nonsensical. But the more you hear it and the more experts come out to bamboozle you, and one after another comes out and says the same thing, just simple repetition, then you say, well, they can't all be lying, for goodness sake. And what would be the point in lying? And you don't realize all the politics behind it, the massive grants behind it, and the social policies that have to come out of this. This is really what the whole idea of climate change and carbon taxing, energy taxing is all about. It's a new system to replace the old system based on energy consumption and the supposed transformation, just like the old alchemists, of course, of any kind of energy into carbon, which they do through mathematical formulas. Any witch doctor could do the same kind of thing and come up with his version, and that would be the standard one that they'd all use, which is basically what they're using. Anyway, it's to really, supposedly, for all the lefties who follow their leaders, the leaders are all paid for by the big banks, by the way, but they don't know that, and the followers never know much at all. They want a fairer, juster world who's more equal, so they believe in the redistribution of wealth across the globe. And that's what they're told by the leaders. Yes, we're going to make sure that they get all this cash going into third world countries to help the poor, and it goes into the pockets of the big international corporations that set up their slave plantations in those particular countries. So everyone's conned, because this is how the world's always been run, through chronology, you understand. Now, there's an article here, and it's called Climate Change. It says the climate change scare machine. Now, I mentioned before a whole bunch of quotes from the big top people who've admitted it's all a scam, and how they always give out scary stories to the public, especially before big world meetings, of impending doom and gloom and the sky is falling, in order to get them all on board and to back these big world meetings that they're having. So it's a big climate change scare machine. It says the perpetual self-feeding cycle of alarm. And by the way, that is what it's called in psychology, because they've tested all these studies out on the public through various, over 100 odd years or more. And they know how to get you on board with something. Two professors at sociology think they can explain why climate deniers are winning. Now, this is money getting thrown at universities too, you understand, to find out ways to get around your denial of it, or your common sense assertions about what you think is happening or has not been happening. And so they find ways to destroy you bit by bit through psychology, sociology, and so on. And it's all techniques, you see. So two professors of sociology think they can explain why climate deniers are winning. And it says, but Riley E. Dunlap and Aaron M. McKnight start from the wrong assumption and miss the bleeding obvious. It says the theory was wrong, and the evidence has changed, and thousands of volunteers have exposed it. The real question sociologists will be studying for years to come is, how was an exaggerated scare based on so little evidence, poor reasoning, and petty name-calling kept alive for 2 whole decades? It's because it's a mandate, that's why. And it says, climate change scare machine cycle. See how your tax dollars are converted into alarming messages. And it's got a PDF, which you can download. I'll put this up at cuttingthroughthematrix.com at the end of the broadcast. And you can see all the incredible funding that goes into all the universities, all the grants that are dished out all over the place. And a lot of it for propaganda purposes alone, in fact. And to make sure the children are all indoctrinated. And it says, the key points are the money that vested interests on the pro-scale side is vastly larger, more influential and more powerful than that on the skeptical side. Fossil fuel and conservative think tanks are competing against most of the world's financial houses. The nuclear and renewable energy industry, large well-financed green activists, such as the World Wildlife Fund revenue last year was $700 million that went to this whole propaganda machine, not to mention whole government departments, major political parties, universities dependent on government funding, the BBC. It says there's no debate, because that's what they said at the BBC. There's no more debate on this, it's closed. The EU and the entire United Nations, they're all on board with it. Despite this highly asymmetrical arrangement, the skeptics are winning simply because they're more convincing. They have the evidence. The other team avoid debate, try to shut down discussion because only their experts count. They imply the audience is too stupid to judge for themselves, and they actually do that too, and then call everyone who disagrees with them rude names. The dumb punters are figuring them out, and it says, so value free speech. It says the evidence has changed, but who wants to know? When the evidence began rolling in showing the assumptions were wrong and the graphs were flawed, actually they were fixed, the thermometers were biased, none of them were the same as the rest of them, they weren't standardized, and the expert scientists were behaving badly, who exactly would benefit from risking their career, cutting off their cash cow, and being exiled from friends, colleagues, and being called a denier for speaking the truth? The perpetual self-feeding cycle of alarmism has its own momentum. Create a scare and siphon up the taxes, fees, fines, charges, and donations. As a bonus, activists feel like heroes. Some collect awards and tributes while they trash the tenets of reason and logic and hail false gods of science as if any authority is above question. Others gratify base desires by pouring scorn on giants of science, dismissing 40 years of top service with one tenuous association as a kind of appeal to a certain kind of person. And it's true, been dismissing top scientists who disagree with them. It's just, how could such poor reasoning triumph for so long in the modern era? The key is that so many benefit from the status quo once alarm is raised. There's no need for a global conspiracy, and most of the organizations and groups named here are doing honest work with respectful intentions. The problem is not conspiratorial, it's systemic. Monopoly science is not the way to seek the truth. Monopolies don't deliver, not in markets, religion, or government either. Think the EU, for instance. We need competition. Once an alarmist cycle is set up with international bureaucracies, industries, taxis, associations, and activists in place, with careers riding on the perpetual alarm, what stops it? Only the people who come out and don't get paid. They're called volunteers who oppose it. Which university or government department do skeptical scientists apply to? There's none. You can't get any, you see. What grant do you apply for? The money, power, and influence is vastly larger on the side that benefits from the alarm. It says on the skeptical side, Exxon chipped in all of $23 million over 10 years, but it's chump change. The fossil fuel industry doesn't like carbon legislation, but it's not life or death, unlike the situation for wind and solar, which would virtually be wiped out without the subsidies provided by the scare. The US government has poured in $79 billion of your tax money and then some. And the pro-scale funding is pervasive. For example, the Australian government spent $14 million on a single ad campaign and another $90 million every year on a Department of Climate Change. The UK government paid for lobbyists. They paid for lobbyists to lobby themselves, and the BBC partners with the lobby groups. The EU doesn't just subsidize renewables, it also pays them to push for more subsidies. Even the dastardly Exxon paid more than 20 times as much for a single renewable research project than it did to the skeptics. Last year in carbon markets, $142 billion turned over, and $243 billion was invested in renewables. It's great business for these guys, get them all for free. Because that's what the governments do. They give them to the big corporations for free, start trading, and they're making profits on them. It says if the carbon market idea went global, it was projected to reach $2 trillion a year. Every banker and his dog has a bone in his game. Why shouldn't they? But actually, it's more than that, and I'll put this up to this link too. It's much more than that. It is a little conspiracy, because I got the documents from an awful long time ago when they had to find ways to get the people of the world to live austerely, you see, and bring in a new system to get rid of their expendable cash. So that was it, energy, carbon taxes, etc. was to be the way to go, and to bring the whole world together under a single governmental system. And that's what the Club of Rome have got in their own darn book, and I've put up the link so many times, I'm sick mentioning it. They were given the task for the United Nations of dreaming up something that would bring the world together, and they said the ideas of famine, plague, global warming and the like, and starvation would fit the bill. So it is definitely more to it than just something that took off by itself. But I'll put this link up and you can have a gander, a wee gander, you call it, a little peek at that. Now, to go along with everything that goes on in the world too. It's never to benefit the public. Nothing is to benefit the public. And I've said for years, once all this carbon taxes come in, believe me, it's passed on to you at the bottom. Here's an article here. Almost 200 corporate jet owners from oil company ExxonMobil to Starbucks and Iceland Foods will be awarded free permits to compensate them for the new expense of Europe's carbon trading scheme for aircraft. So there, they get an exemption. The emissions trading scheme means airlines will have to surrender a permit for every 1 ton of carbon dioxide they emit, which is expected to raise the cost of flying for millions of passengers. Bigger airlines such as EasyJet and British Airways have long been preparing for huge bills from the emissions trading scheme. They will get a large number of free allowances in the first few years of the scheme to protect their businesses from becoming uneconomic, in other words, bankrupt. However, corporate jet owners, the corporate ones, big corporations and private guys, will also be able to take advantage of these free allowances, potentially selling them on for cash if they don't use their aircraft as much as in previous years. This is what they're getting. They're getting so much, you see. And if they don't use it in 1 year, all of it in 1 year, they get cash back. Or they can sell it to someone else who collects them, just like coins. It says dozens of corporate jet owners will get free permits, including Iceland Foods, JP Morgan Chase, Procter & Gamble, Hertz Corporation, McDonald's, IBM, and Coca-Cola. Flying Line Limited, a company used by Lord Ashcroft, which has flown conservative politicians around the world, will initially get 24 allowances per year, worth €240 or £207 at today's prices. Not bad for the bigwigs, as they all make you suffer. You see, they're not going to have austerity. They're going to have austerity. And the third world, well, they own it. Back with more after this break.